Ever since my amazing voice acting debut, I've been hard at work playing Diablo 4. Like a lot. And also getting ready for League of Legends' new game mode 2v2v2v2. A fun game mode with new items, new arenas, new augments, and new opportunities for a great time with a buddy.
This is my Joker arc.
This mode was designed around fun. Then they added a ranked mode, so, you know, we can all throw fun out of the window. Me and my friend, who was ranked challenger, played every single champion and ranked them on a tier list. In this game mode, there are 3 different archetypes that the champions will fall under: fighters, kiters, and stallers. Fighters want to kill you. They are the bruisers, the assassins, and the burst mages. They are very straightforward, and they mostly pair with each other since 2 people that can kill is usually better than 1. Kiters want to kill you, but, you know, from a really safe distance.
That's quite big.
They either don't have the damage to kill you outright, or don't have the health to survive getting killed outright. So they spend their time running around the arena, poking and stealing the plants. And hopefully they have enough of a health advantage when overtime starts to finish you off before something stupid happens. Since they often can't protect themselves, they are better off with stallers. Stallers want to be annoying. They are the tanks, the supports, and the trap placers. They don't want to kill you and sometimes don't even want to interact with you. They just want the game to go into overtime, where you walk into their traps, their CC, or their bigger health bar. CC and zone control are surprisingly really good in a small arena. So a lot of the stallers can be paired with just about anyone else. But specific stallers have ridiculous combos that we'll get into later. And of course, these archetypes aren't hard and fast rules. Champions can be multiple archetypes at once, and their win condition can change depending on who they're fighting with and against. So, this tier list will be based on how good they are at their role, how reliant they are on good augments, and how consistent they are against a multitude of teams. In an effort to be easy to follow, we'll be going alphabetically, and each letter will be time-stamped if you want to know just how good your favorite champion is. And in an effort to get this video out by this year, we're going to assume you know what each champion does, and we'll have a relatively quick reasoning for their placement. Unless they have, you know, a unique trait, or if I really just want to talk about them. If you want to hear the full explanations, I'll have that on my second channel, where you can see me and my partner talk about this for nearly 3 hours. Hopefully this won't be 3 hours. I guess we'll see. And remember, these are not opinions. These are facts. And if you disagree with them, you're not just wrong, you're stupid. In all seriousness, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I personally love theory crafting and labbing random things out, but this is meant to be a fun game mode, okay? Play who you want, and don't think that just because I put someone in C tier that they're completely useless or unplayable. Just know that if a Heimerdinger Shaco team is pissing you off, you have a handy dandy tier list of champions that can deal with him and everyone else you might be annoyed with. And with all of that out of the way, we can now begin the tier list. Starting off with my main, Aatrox is a really good champion. He's the first example of a drain tank, and you'll find very quickly that drain tanks are very strong in 2v2s. He can duel most fighters, he can somewhat gap close against kiters, and he can save his ult and out heal quite a bit of the tanks in overtime. His only real downside is that his damage is a little lacking compared to the majority of the higher tier champions, and relies on having another damage dealer to really close out kills. But even with that glaring disadvantage, he slots nicely into A+. Ahri kinda sucks. Weak damage, way too reliant on hitting her charm, and doesn't really bring much to any team. She can't use most augments, and the augments she can use aren't even that impactful. Not the worst, but there's no reason to ever pick her. Unfortunately, doesn't do much of anything. Her damage is meant to burst down one backliner, but there are so many augments that turn backliners into tanks, and so many bruisers that she never really shines ever, even when given the opportunity. For a character that has 3 completely useless moves, he's actually okay. His invisibility is useless, his ult is never impactful, and the revive passive occurs once every 10 rounds. But the double shot is nice, and he benefits from a lot of good augments. There are better ADCs, but he fares pretty well. Say hello to the first overtime cheeser. Great CC, extremely hard to kill, but most importantly, he can launch you directly into the Fortnite zone. He's insanely strong against any team, and does the same thing regardless of what augments he sees, thanks to his ridiculous flat damage reduction. A top tier for sure. Amumu, another great tank, but far from a staller. 2 Qs on a low cooldown lets him stick on to anyone he needs to, and having an AoE stun is very good when you only need to hit 2 people. He brings his own CC and consistent damage with things like Demonic Embrace and all of the burn augments, making him very strong when paired with someone that does damage, long or short range. You can go tank augments or damage augments and fill in the gaps with itemization. There's almost nothing bad to say about him. You know where he goes. S tier. Anivia, a surprisingly average mage. I initially thought that with her godly zone control, she'd be a contender for one of the best scalers in the game. But the reality for champions like Anivia is that people who want to fight her can just attempt to get in multiple times with all of the plants around, and the people that don't want to fight her and just want to wait until overtime, just wait until overtime, and then she's out of zone to control. This puts the pressure on her to make something happen, and if you aren't playing perfect, you just kinda get curb stomped. Don't get me wrong, if things go right, either by getting favorable matchups or by getting her good stage, then yes, she is your worst nightmare. But more often than not, it's her partner dragging her to the finish line, or them just not getting to the finish line at all. Oh, and her egg does come back every round, but if you're ever in your egg, the game's kinda already over. Annie is really just a bear with a little girl following it. There are way too many augments that give cooldown reduction or burn or tankiness or all of the above, which makes it really hard to run away from this bear that is constantly getting a shield and movement speed and burning you for all of your HP. You can try to kill the bear, but there's probably a point and click CC standing directly behind it. You can try to kill her, which technically isn't that hard to do, but when you do, you now have to deal with an enraged bear and her partner standing right next to her. The caveat is that she's just a stun bot if she doesn't get any good augments, but the odds of her not getting any good augments or something even slightly useful is not in your favor. When the game first hit PvE, Aphelios was one of the best ADCs. Back then, champions could stack passives or fury, or in the case of Aphelios, use ammo on the training dummies. Being able to take whatever guns you wanted to each fight was an insane buff to his damage and consistency. Now you can't do that. You have to cycle in the rounds themselves and hope that you have the right guns for the right matchups. There are some augments that can drag him back into viability, but the fact that his early game is trash and he starts to race so far behind every other ADC means there's almost no reason to pick him. More of an annoyance than a threat, Ashe is good at starting the fight with her ult and kiting in a 1v1 at the end. But with actually lackluster damage and a reliance on very specific augments to show up, and no survivability without a strong frontline, I don't think she's that good. In the right situations, she can make something happen, but once again, more of an annoyance than anything else. In order to balance champions with special scaling properties, Riot gives all of these champions a certain amount of their stacks per round. Sol gets Disguised Descent around round 4, which is just around the point when the rounds actually matter. He deals a ton of damage, has a % health execute that scales with his Disguised Descent. What do they call the things? Hold on. A % health execute that scales with his Stardust stacks, and gets pretty tanky with the Rod of Ages Rylai's build. Once he gets going, there's not much that can stop him. Azir. He's certainly funny. Azir trades away some of that Anivia zone control for a dash, which helps him stall out matches more, and he does have the niche ability to take plants from a very long distance. But without any hard CC, he can't really run forever. And when he gets caught, he's gonna have to outdamage the people standing directly on top of him. Sometimes he can do it, but more often than not, he's gonna need a bailout from his team member, or the round is just lost. Bard is the first of the more theory crafted champions. See, my teammate went the wonkiest, splonkiest build.
Okay. I'm gonna hit level 6, stall out to the end. Ult, flash into my own ult, then ult Zhonya's, and then I come out of the Zhonya's into my own ultimate again, while they're burning the entire time.
Oh my god, it's okay. Being able to isolate one guy for 2.5 seconds is great. Doing it for 5 seconds is just immortal, but for the rest of the time, I was doing most of the damage and actually kiting for myself. He gets free chimes, and with his damage build, I think he can be really good. But I don't play Bard, and my teammate wanted the funny 12-second invulnerability. So Bel'Veth gets a lot of free lavender stacks. She scales quickly without ever having to do anything, and is free to go the more bruisery build while still having tons of damage. She has her own knockup, and with that consistent damage and the means to gap close on the more slippery targets, she's pretty damn good. However, her knockup is pretty easy to dodge without her partner locking them down first, and she is a little reliant on some good augments to make sure she doesn't get super outscaled, but she's still very, very strong. Blitzcrank. Having a hook is good, but Blitzcrank doesn't really offer anything else. Compared to the likes of Thresh, Nautilus, and even Pyke to an extent, Blitz gets his hook and has to kill the target right then and there. Otherwise, he offers next to nothing utility or damage-wise. He can get augments to help with both of these things, but he has to commit to either being the front line or dealing damage. Trying to do both means Blitz can't do either. Yeah, kinda sucks. A bit of a soft counter to tank/carry comps or the frontline backline comps that we may see pretty often, but terrible against the double bruiser, double fighter, or really double staller comps. A bit of a biased review considering in our nearly 100 games, I was the only brand I saw the entire time, and in that game, I got Jeweled Gauntlet. You can imagine what that does to a man's outlook on a champion. Even without Jeweled Gauntlet though, Brand brings a lot to the table. With how prevalent tanks, drain tanks, healers, and bruisers are, being the best Liandry's user in the entire game means a lot. Having a stun and an ult that can bounce between the only two opponents only makes it that much better. Similar to Annie, there are multiple burned and ability haste augments that give him a nice consistency and a more than decent chance of permanently stacking burn. He can also build relatively tanky with itemization, omnivamp, and some of the other tanky augments, making him what I believe a very strong mage. Braum. Easily the second best peeler in this game mode, but unlike the number one, he doesn't do anything else. He only has to defend one person, and he's more than capable of keeping his partner alive, but without offering any damage of his own, his partner better have killed one or both champions in the 10 being generous seconds he buys. Augments don't really help, he has flat damage reduction and doesn't actually need more health and defense, but it helps. Does his job well, but his job isn't exactly needed. Caitlyn is good at one item, or 6. She spends the majority of the game in between these two numbers. She sucks as a primary carry, but if her partner isn't good at peeling, then she's going to spend most of her time running away, putting her in a bit of a lose-lose situation. On top of that, she can't utilize as many augments as she would like, putting her in weird situations where she gets okay augments, but really would rather reroll for better ones almost all the time. Not completely useless, not exactly good though. If you know anything about Camille, you would know that she's perfect for a game mode like this. A long distance gap close, a short cooldown true damage Q, an isolating ult, and an adaptive shield. She offers a lot, both in 2v2s and 1v1s against just about anyone. She thrives without ever needing any augments, and fits as a fighter alongside another bruiser, or as a good kiter with the strong backline. Being able to dual tanks in overtime is also an invaluable quality to have, so she's obviously going an S. Cassiopeia. Straight up a hard carry. Her and Singed are the only two champions with grounded, which is insane against all the dashes and the flashes and the movement speeds you're going to be going up against. She scales incredibly hard as well, and works extremely well with a lot of the burn damage augments, but also likes a bunch of the movement speed ones as well. If she gets mythical, which allows her to buy as many mythical items as she wants, it's almost an instant win. She's not impossible to beat, but with even a semi-competent partner, she's very, very hard to. Cho'Gath, a self-sufficient tank, but self-sufficiency without being able to properly kill people kinda sucks. At the very least, he does have the option to go full AP, but giving up tankiness to do it also kinda sucks. He does have an execute and does get stacks in between rounds, but neither of those things really matter. Dealing 1000 and, let's say 1200 true damage on his ult doesn't really matter when they're healing and have 5000 HP, so, you don't really feel any power with him. He can do well with an ADC or a strong backline mage, but there are just so many other champions that just do it better. He would be garbage if he didn't get his package every single round after 2. Package in Summoner's Rift wins 5v5 fights. I can't imagine it wouldn't do the same in a 2v2. However, this does take a level of knowledge with Corki on when and how to use it properly, knowledge that not everyone, including me, has. He actually doesn't pair that well with enchanters or tanks since he doesn't do enough consistent damage to justify being the solo carry. He really likes another poker to stand alongside him and supplement that damage. But I thought he was going to be garbage. Much better than I anticipated. Darius. Funny 1000 true damage ultimate. His weaknesses are the same from Summoner's Rift. If he can catch you, he's very hard to beat, but he has no way of catching you himself. Obviously your partner can help you with that, but that's putting a lot on his shoulders considering if he misses the sweet spot on his Q, he does nothing. There's not a lot of movement speed augments that he can actually use since he doesn't have a dash, and there's not a lot of augments he can actually use anyway. Just kinda sucks. As a jungler, she can make or break 5v5 team fights, but the damage on her ult scales with how many people it pulls, and unfortunately for her, there's only 2 people. Her damage is lackluster, and with her only CC being her ult, she actually offers next to nothing to any team. Augments don't help her in the slightest, except maybe mythical. Just kinda bad. Dr. Mundo is the first of the true stallers. He does offer solid damage with his Q since it deals % current health magic damage, and people tend to like building health here. He offers no utility though, having nothing but a slow. But what really makes him invaluable, he heals a lot of health, like all of it, like his entire health bar. You can imagine how useful that is in overtime when everyone else is burning and losing health. He's not like the best overtime champ, as we'll see better ones later, but healing is good, and he's certainly one of the best to do it in this game mode. So, Draven is by far the most interesting ADC in this game mode. He does get adoration stacks every round, passively, the game just gives it to him, and can cash in every round if he gets kills. If he cashes out even somewhat consistently, then he is the only champion in the entire game that can get an item advantage, and he can utilize this item advantage very well. With the Trinity Force build supplied by my very intellectual partner, he becomes one of the few kiters that can do everything on his own. He has built-in movement speed, built-in knockback, built-in burst, and built-in consistent damage. This jack of all trades opens up the ability to combine him with much more champions than just other ADCs or mages. It opens up the ability to use and utilize just about any augment he can get his hands on. While he doesn't offer as much damage as some of the other ADCs in the late game, he can certainly set his team up for success by killing every team early. Echo is pretty horrendous. He has a long cooldown AoE stun and little to no damage. I don't think he's that special or does anything special with augments, except for maybe like double ultimate. He's kinda useless. At least didn't get the best foot forward. We were trying to play every single champion and we were running out of available combos, so we landed on Evelynn. Despite actually playing a complete 1v2, Elise actually showed a lot of promise. A 2-second cocoon sets up quite nicely for both herself and her teammate, and with a little bit of augment luck, she can do a lot of damage in the late game. More theory crafting than experience, but I think she does offer something. Unlike the person she was partnered with, Evelynn is useless. She requires a way to get around people, and without a jungle, she just can't do that in this game mode. The full AP build results in her leaving her teammate completely alone, and is completely useless anyway since people can either build tanky or get tanky augments. So she has to build more bruisery, and she's not a bruiser. No positives to her whatsoever. I've seen him succeed, but I'm a little confused as to where exactly he stands. While he offers good-ish damage and more adaptability with his item and augment builds, I've also seen him kinda just die. There are way too many champions that can follow him after his 1E, and if his partner, which almost always has to be another front line for him to succeed, doesn't stop them from closing that gap, he just dies. I think in the right situation, he is one of the best solo carries in the game, but he still struggles quite a bit against super tanks and the stallers. But apart from them, he can just do quite well against anyone else. Fiddlesticks requires his ult to go off to do anything, and it's way too easy to stop him before that even happens, or to just wait for it to end and then go in. If he lives long enough to get to the final overtime circle, he can fear and drain tank enough to get something done, but he has to get there first, and he has to get there against people who don't have CC, and he doesn't have a real way of getting himself there in the first place. Listen, she has dashes, true damage, healing, more true damage, and more healing with her ultimate, and has by far the most broken interaction with the Blade Dance augment. She's only this low because she's weak to the front backline comps with really strong kiters, and the very stupid stallers, or the big three as I like to call them. But against anything else, you know, good luck. This is where you'll need to know that assassins don't really work here. They offer nothing other than burst damage, so they have to kill their target outright, or they become extremely useless. And with augments that give people health, resistances, and the fact that most of the strong characters are just hard to kill anyway, they don't really have a place to fit in. That being said, Fizz has enough tools to get in. Fizz has enough tools to get in and get out to be more of an exception to the rule. He can be a contender to break through those frontline backline comps, but he needs a bit of luck from his augments and a bit of unluck from the enemy's augments as well. Also, once again, can't really do much against the bruisers and tanks, but he does stand as a wrench in the sides of quite a few team comps, including some of the likes of the big three. Even in the best of circumstances, he requires a hard CC teammate to give him a chance to use his ultimate. And even if he does get his ultimate off, or just ignores his ultimate entirely and just walks forward, he doesn't do anything. No damage, terrible peel, and gets obliterated by a lot of the higher tiered champions. One of the few champions I'd honestly tell you to just never use. The issue is that I suck as Gangplank, and every Gangplank I've seen also sucks. I personally don't think he can stack up to the higher tiers, but I can't imagine him being that bad. Unlike Darius, Garen can live long enough and close the gap quick enough to be a threat to ranged champs. Unlike Darius, Garen doesn't do enough damage to actually be a threat to any melee champ. Way too reliant on getting Mega Gnar at the right time. When there's no minions to build rage, and if the fight starts or ends at the wrong time, then he's actually just completely useless. And even if he does get Mega Gnar at the right time, it's still nowhere near a game winner because, you know, he still has to do damage, and he doesn't really do that in either form. We thought he would actually be much better than he actually is. He can somewhat stall with his numerous disengage options, and can somewhat cheese in overtime if he still has his ult, but his lack of consistent healing or damage is his major downfall. His passive is on just a bit of a too long cooldown to be reliable, but the burst build isn't enough to kill most champions, So he's stuck in this weird middle ground where he doesn't do nothing great or doesn't really do anything even good, but nothing he does is actually bad. Graves, more augment dependent than I would like, but in the right circumstances and into the right matchups, he actually can really shine. He really needs a stronger bruiser champ that can soak up most of the heavy hits though. Gwen, one of the more obvious S tiers. She has literally everything you would want. Percent max health damage, a short cooldown dash, true damage, can use most augments, can work well with nearly any champion. I mean, not much else to say, she's really good. He has the ability to get in, but he doesn't actually have the tools to stay in. It's very easy to just walk out of his effective range after his combo, and even when you're hit, he just doesn't do nowhere near enough damage to warrant ever getting picked. Feast your eyes on the first of the big three. Even with a set cooldown on his turrets, you have to take the fight directly into everything he does, his turrets, his rockets, and his bombs immediately. Or you risk going into overtime with 4 turrets whittling you down in a very tiny circle. He is a must-answer champion, and a majority of champions can't answer him, not while literally anyone else is standing right next to him keeping him healthy. Most augments work well on him, but are largely irrelevant since he does the exact same thing every single time. The best champs in this mode are the ones that can deal with him and the other 2 of the big 3 to some extent, and that fact alone puts him at the very top of this list. If they come to her, then things go okay. The small arenas do help turn her from the worst champion in Summoner's Rift to not the worst champion in 2v2s. But they aren't that small, and they aren't small enough to actually make her good. Every character in this game can simply walk out of her ult in her E until it gets to overtime, and most champs that want to get to overtime can just stay outside of her range and poke her down before anything happens. She's way too reliant on a hard CC partner, and even with a hard CC partner, nothing really happens unless the enemy has to come to you. Okay against some champions, terrible against the vast majority of them. On paper, she seems like she would suck since she can't pre-stack her passive on minions like in Summoner's Rift. But with how tanky her build and augments can make her, it almost doesn't matter. The fight is going to go long enough to where she gets them maxed out anyway. She still struggles against the top tiers, but can hold her own relatively well. Ivern, a surprise to everyone, he's arguably the best enchanter in 2v2. His shield is on an unbearably quick cooldown. He has a 2-second root that him and his partner can use to close gaps, and Daisy is a nuisance. He benefits from nearly every non-DPS augment, and with even some ability haste or heal or shield power, he can be basically impossible to kill. Janna is very solid with every meta-defining staller. Tornadoes become much harder to dodge in these small arenas, and her ult is a get-out-of-jail-free card for both her and her teammate. However, she does lack consistent heals and offers no damage, so she's a bit more restricted than other enchanters like Ivern. But with the right partner, she actually can really shine. Jarvan's alright. He doesn't get away with the lethality build, so he's forced to go the bruiser build, which just doesn't stack up against the likes of the top tiers. But for the champions below him, his ult is a real problem, and he's a tough nut to crack. Jax is the bruiser to beat in this game mode. He's known for being one of the toughest top laners to contend with when he gets items, and guess what? The game gives him items.
Yes.
He's like one of 3 champions that can build any item and use any augment. He doesn't have the highest DPS, nor is he the hardest to kill, but the fact that he's in contention for both while having the most adaptability of any champion puts him near the very top. Jace. Much better than expected actually, since augments help him keep his damage profile up throughout the game. He's one of the few champions that actually can threaten one-shot combos against the non-tanks, but he needs a lot to go right for that to happen. But I mean, 0 to 70ing is still good, especially when you have a second guy standing right behind you, ready to close out those kills. Jhin, garbage. No damage, no self-peel options, and using your ult puts your partner in a straight-up 1v2. It's never good. Augments don't help at all, and on top of that, Jhin is the only champion that has to trade his damage to shoot the plants. Don't play him. Jinx. She's really just the worst Kai'Sa. She needs to ramp up to get to her optimal DPS, and even with that ramping, she lacks the strong self-peel or survivability that some of the other better ADCs have. She's more rigid in her build and can't make use of the ability haste or the tanky augments as well as the other ADCs can. She can't be that bad, but you know, she can't be that good either. K'Sante, a big wall of meat. The fact that he has to give up his tankiness to actually do damage is a major downside, since he doesn't offer much in the way of CC or peel. His one great advantage is that, well, he's a big wall of meat, and a big wall of meat is hard to kill in overtime. He can also ult him into the circle and use his Q3 to keep him there. No heals is a big L, but, you know, still not that bad. Kai'Sa. She's a far better Jinx. She can explode people with the right augments, and the fact that she can build AP, AD, or both means that the right augments are just about anything. She also has fantastic self-peel with her ultimate and going invisible with her E, but most of the time it doesn't quite matter with how quickly she can kill. A fantastic pick. Kalista. She's hard to lock down without some sort of point-and-click CC, but you have a lot of time to do so. She needs to hit you with a lot of spears, like a lot of them. Augments don't really help her damage since her damage is in her spears, but being hard to kill does stand for something. Karma. Mundo with shields. AP Karma can cheese early rounds, but falls off incredibly hard. Her real strength is full tank Karma, using constant empowered Ws to heal thousands and thousands and thousands of health. Her real strength is that she doesn't have to worry about being on a support budget like in Summoner's Rift, and can scale incredibly well. Her shields aren't as strong as someone like Ivern, and is more self-centered than just about any other enchanter, but Moonstone in 2v2s transfers heals and shields from one person to the other, so healing yourself heals your teammate as well, and vice versa. It really does help bridge that gap between her and the other enchanters. Karthus. In just an unfortunate situation. He wants to get to overtime, and has absolutely no way of getting himself there. Very, very squishy, very, very slow, and nothing but a wall that just kinda slows you. If he gets to overtime, then yeah, he is technically one of the best, but it is a very, very big if. Kassadin. Takes time to scale, but just doesn't scale as fast or as hard as he needs to. Katarina. Alongside Jax and Kai'Sa, can make use of both AD and AP builds in the augments very successfully, which is a big plus. She's arguably the best Gunblade user, and is very hard to lock down with how quickly you can throw blades and shampoo around. Her only real downsides is that she herself can't really lock down the big three, and suffers quite a bit against the super tanks, which are both pretty big downsides. The prime example of why the early rounds don't matter at all. She loses hard in like the first 5 rounds, but the game gives her levels and items naturally. So naturally, she will turn into Kayle before running out of health. And as everyone knows, dealing with the real Kayle is a problem for almost anyone. Once again, her only real downside is that she has to go out of her comfort zone to chase down the big three, and has a hard time against hard CC. But in both situations, all she needs is a couple of seconds to turn the tide completely. The Assassin Red Cane build is the most oppressive melee build in the entirety of 2v2, and his interaction with Axiomark was, and still is, game-breaking. His ult deals % max health damage, and Axiomark increases that by 25%. Alongside literally everything else in his kit, he can obliterate any champion he's allowed to get near. With the meta being as bruiser and tank dominant as it is, you can imagine why Kayn is at the very top of S tier. Even still, there are some champions that have the edge against him. Kennen in Summoner's Rift relies on getting an advantage in top lane and transferring that lead into team fights where he one-shot squishies. As we've been over, squishies don't really thrive, and trying to do the same to a 6,000 health Jax, it just doesn't work. Against the right characters, i.e. not the people above him, he can do well, but he just suffers against the best. Kha'Zix is only as high as he is because of the very strong Ka-Mord combo. Being able to force isolation for like 7 entire seconds is insane for him. But with Mord being banned or just not played, which will happen very often considering how polarizing going against Mord is, Ka really can't do anything into two bruisers standing right next to each other. Kindred ultimate is great. Getting one stack every round for free is great. She just doesn't do enough damage for either of those things to even matter. Kled was reworked in the game mode to have a 30-second cooldown on mounting. This is a hard cooldown, and it cannot be decreased by any means. This gutted a character that had the potential to be an S tier, and now he offers next to nothing for him or his team. Kog'Maw is the one wrench in every champion's plans. He stands alone as the best champion to make use of the no attack speed cap, and within a few rounds becomes one of, if not the highest DPS champion, and from a distance that no one else can compete with. Most characters can close the gap, but not without taking half or more of their HP before they do it. And even if they have some trick up their sleeve, Kog'Maw can grab tanky augments or grab damage augments and build tankier, giving him the 1 or 2 extra seconds he needs to just kill you outright. On top of that, he is one of the best champions at handling the 4 people in his own tier. Being able to destroy Heimerdinger turrets before even getting in range, chasing down Shaco and obliterating him when he inevitably loses invisibility, staying far enough away from Teemo and his shrooms to avoid the blind before killing him, and destroying Swain before healing can even matter. And if he's paired with Milio, then everything I just said times 10. He gets much more range, much more survivability, and on top of that, a cleanse. Personally, I think Milio Kog'Maw is the best combo in 2v2, contested only by the cheesiest of cheese. But even without Milio, you are the must-answer champion in any and every game you step foot in. LeBlanc, an assassin that can't one-shot. Wait, hold on. Unlike most assassins, she can reliably get in and get out over and over again. This way, she turns more into a kiter than anything, and can whittle down your HP piece by piece, burst by burst, until she can actually one-shot you. Nothing too special, but actually really good at what she does. Lee Sin, unfortunately, just doesn't stack up to the big dogs. He doesn't offer enough damage or enough CC, and even in the ideal situation where maybe you kick one guy into the other or get an insect or something like that, nothing really comes of it. A cool character and does have some funky interactions with augments, but largely unseen in the grand scheme of things. If you want to kill someone, she's the best support in making that happen. Throws herself in, ults, Qs, and can get very close to permacy seeing on her own with some good augments. Offers no damage whatsoever though, so the teammate jumping in with her better be good. Lilia. The weaving in and out playstyle isn't that good in 2v2s, but her ult is actually insane for setting up for burst or ignoring one guy to go after the other, preferably more squishy target. Good interactions with burn augments, she's really all about landing that good ult. Going over walls to shut down stallers is her biggest advantage, and she largely doesn't care about Zhonya's since she can just wait it out or just use ult on herself. Still, her damage isn't anything to write home about, and she's mostly there to set up for her teammate. But if her teammate can do it, then she can make it happen. Also, pretty weak against bruisers. Lucian is, unfortunately, just a cooler Kalista. He can dash a bunch and shoot a bunch and look flashy, but he has a hard time getting through such large health bars. He just doesn't scale that well against, 7,000 HP. Lulu. Surprisingly, not that good. Most team comps have 2 people that are a must-answer threat. Polymorphing one of them in exchange for also being useless yourself isn't that good of a trade. Your slow isn't much to write home about, your shield is much less reliable and on a much longer cooldown than other enchanters, and your ult isn't as good of a get out of jail free card as other supports like Janna. Not quite useless, but just not worth picking over other supports. Lux, an artillery mage, and guess what? Artillery mages suck. They need a safe space to back up to in order to keep the pressure up, like a turret, but in here, there's nowhere to run. They can't protect themselves, and they certainly don't do enough damage to warrant their existence. Being able to R towards an enemy, forcing them to flash, Zhonya's, or die, is, shocker, pretty good. Obviously, bursting most champions isn't that plausible, but he holds a special place as a soft counter to the big three. Don't go full tank or you will do absolutely nothing. Malzahar, a 2.5 second point and click CC that's interruptible. If he isn't interrupted, then sure, he can kill one guy, but it isn't exactly often that their teammate is just gonna let you ult them for free. I still hate his very existence, but he's not actually that good. Maokai, Dr. Mundo, but with CC. He is very hard to kill on his own, but also has the added benefits of being able to build demonic and offer some damage, and has much stronger interactions with augments that can turn him from extremely hard to kill to literally unkillable. He can peel for stallers, go in with fighters, and create more than enough space for kiters. He is a jack of all trades and a master of all, except for damage. Master Yi, a melee Kog'Maw. As we've seen many times, champions that usually have to worry about scaling in time don't have to worry about scaling in time, and that is really good. Unlike the Kaels and the Kog'Maws of this world though, he has to worry about the prevalent amount of CC, and still has trouble into a couple important matchups like Teemo, Kayn, and Maokai, which knocks him down a little bit, but at the end of the day, invalidating 80% of the cast outright is still way more than enough to fit firmly in S. Milio. The other piece of the Kog'Maw puzzle, Milio shines best with the god himself, but having a quick knockback, constant healing, and a cleanse for his teammate is pretty good for a lot of other champions too. He'd prefer ranged champs because then he can build tankier and kite with them while keeping them alive for an annoying amount of time. If you're going melee, he definitely can work, but you know, just go Ivern, honestly. MF. APMF sucks. A DMF can kill people, but she has to not die to the endless CC and rushdown to do it. ADCs have obvious issues here, and trying to reiterate this in new ways is getting troublesome. So, let's just say ADC bad and move on with our lives, okay? Mord has the unique ability to turn every 2v2 into 2 1v1s. This is very good against frontline backline comps and stallers, particularly the big three. Giving you or your teammate an unfiltered 7 seconds to kill whoever you need is strong, to say the least. The only reason he isn't higher is because Mord has a glaring weakness against bruisers, which are, surprise surprise, dominating the higher tiers. Not in the hard counter sense, he doesn't exactly get blown up or doesn't, not do damage. Just in the sense that 7 seconds, it just isn't enough time to kill any of them. So you kind of just exist in this space, fighting them endlessly until your ult ends. Morgana. Actually one of the better enablers for solo carries. 3 seconds of not moving is great to close the gap and start dealing damage. And it's on a short enough cooldown that it is a constant threat. In Black Shield against all physical bruisers that have little to no way of getting that Black Shield off, means your teammate is just kind of immune to CC and is free to walk in and do what he wants. Also, she has an ult, that's kind of cool. She's obviously limited on good augments, good partners, and good matchups, and magic damage destroys all hope of Black Shield doing anything. But she is good against specific matchups, and she's great at getting things going. Naafiri. Who really knows? I've seen Naafiris do nothing, I've seen one solo carry, no one really knows how to play as or against her, so I give her the benefit of the doubt because she does do damage, but I don't really know. Nami. Bubble is hard to hit and doesn't offer much. Her healing isn't anything to write home about. Giving attacks extra damage and slow is great, and her ult is just a weaker Janna ult. Not terrible, but once again just not worth picking over just about any other enchanter. Susan only gets 50 stacks per round. By round 9, effectively the end game in 2v2s, he has 450 stacks. That's nothing, and he has no way of stacking in this game on his own. His ult makes him tankier and still somewhat of a threat, but it doesn't last forever, and even with augments, his damage falters so much. Nautilus. Better at frontlining than Allistar. Far worse at everything else. Less tanky, less engaged threat, less combinable with any other champion. Augments don't do much, but a staple of frontline backline comps. Nico. Above average, but is just held back by being a little too reliant on good augments to get going. It's not hard to land good ults, and turning into a flower is quite funny, but just isn't as tanky or as damaging as she needs to be to push into A tier. Nidalee. Much better than I thought she would be, but she's still just a discount Jace. She does worse long range damage, worse close range damage, and just isn't as safe as he is. But throwing spears and running around the map is still a surprisingly effective strategy if you can stay out of danger long enough. Nyla. I played her and it felt okay, I've played against her and felt like she didn't do anything, and I've played against her and felt like she was unkillable. Regardless, still struggles against the higher ups, but not bad. Nocturne. Oh, poor Nocturne. The two people you're fighting will almost always be right next to each other and be well out of one-shot range, so his ult and his combo are entirely useless. He has a bunch of builds, Assassin, Bruiser, Stride Builder, this and that, but none of them do anything. Nunu. He can become very tanky, he can heal a lot, and his ult can hold people in place for his teammate. Not as good as Maokai, and has to sacrifice quite a bit to start doing damage, but still really good. As long as he can keep his ult up, he's a must-answer bruiser. If you can kite him out, keeping him at arm's length until it's done, then he's much more squishy and easier to take out. Even out of ult though, with good augments, he's certainly still dangerous, but he's gotta have a little bit of luck to get there. Orianna. The ball giving a shield and resistances while on you or your teammate is Orianna's hidden gem. It gives her access to the enchanter augments and can change her build from the damage dealer to a more supportive enchanter depending on what she gets, and can still threaten one-shots with Malphite or other effective gap closers. Solid. Ornn is a big tank with a lot of situational CC and no healing. He can give his teammate a little more strength with his upgrading items passive, but is still beaten out by the dashers and the stallers that can just avoid most of his CC. Pantheon. Point and click CC is invaluable against some of the higher tiers, specifically the big three, and has good survivability with E. His damage falls off a cliff though, and will very quickly become a stun bot for his teammate. As with Leona or Lissandra, stunning is still good, but unlike them, he can't go through walls. Poppy. She does literally everything. Can chase you down for a fight, can sit in front of someone to stall for overtime, can use ult to knock you firmly in the zone when overtime starts. And on top of all of this, she does damage. Why does she do damage? Pyke. In a game mode where people build a lot of health and grab a bunch of different health augments, not being able to get health at all is, shocker, awful. Despite this, people tried their hardest to make him work, only to die in overtime anyway. Only not completely useless because he does have the funny pull tech, but don't be fooled by the funny waterman. Sorry Ergon, Pyke is garbage. Qiyana. Assassin. That's really all you need to know. It's a good ult that can make use of Axiom Art, but apart from that, not much else going for her. Quinn loves to get her ult off multiple times, and has the means to create her own space, but she often leaves her teammate in 1v2s to do it, and more often than not, doesn't do enough damage to warrant all that pressure you're putting on your teammate. In other words, ADC kinda bad. Rakan. His engage is crazy good when he only has to worry about two people, but he isn't tanky enough to survive for long after, so it often doesn't do enough to win the fight outright unless his teammate does a crazy amount of damage, or Xayah. Rammus. He lives and dies on who he's playing against. Against a lot of the AD bruisers, he's just a major nuisance that never dies. But against the AP bruisers and tanks that heal a lot anyway, he either gets completely blown up or just doesn't live as long as they do. This wouldn't be too much of a problem if he offered some utility for his teammate, but a one-man taunt isn't exactly promising. Still, favorable matchups into quite a bit of the higher tiers does stand for something. Rek'Sai. Textbook, not enough. Does damage, but not enough. Does true damage, but not enough. Heals, but, not enough. She needs augments to cover all of her holes, but there's way too many of them to effectively keep this ship afloat. Rell. Up there with Leona on solid hard to counter engage, but Rell is a little tankier and plays into augments a little better. Nothing to write home about, but is definitely in the upper echelon of champions. In a small arena, it's very hard to dodge her abilities, and she plays into 2v2s where people fight next to each other extremely well. Her Qs can almost always be used to stun both, her E's are getting maximum efficiency, and her ult turns them against each other for a concerning amount of time. Against frontline backline comps, she's a menace. Against everything else, especially the big three, she's alright. Renekton. He's Renekton. He does Renekton things, but unlike in Summoner's Rift, he gets augments that keep him relevant throughout the game. He's big, he's a bruiser, he heals, he's Renekton. He's good. Rengar Ivern is an insanely strong combo, arguably top 5 with how well they synergize and how good Ivern is. But without Ivern, he can still hold his own with the self-cleanse and heal, and his short cooldown Qs to keep the damage up. Riven. It's Riven, bro. She has crazy short cooldowns, a dash, a stun, and can synergize with a lot of movement, damage, and tank augments. She's a bruiser. Bruisers are good. She's good. Come on, you kind of knew this already. Rumble. Quirky package, but on a cooldown that you can reduce with plants. Burn augments work insanely well on him, and does have an ever so slight advantage over Brand with his shield and his movement speed. Rise. There are a bunch of great augments that can boost his already pretty tanky frame, especially the one that converts 50% of your mana to health. Apart from that, point and click CC and constant damage does make him pretty strong in the champions that want to fight him, but struggles to keep the pressure up against constant CC or the run and gunners, particularly the front and backline comps. Samira can make things happen for herself, but the health bars she has to get through are often just too big for her to deal with. She heals, which is very strong, but she needs to be not CC'd to do it. And with her having to go into melee for any meaningful damage, it means she's susceptible to much more CC than her other ADCs. Still, very far from bad. Sejuani. She's a tank. She tanks. She doesn't do much other than tank, and she's far from the best tank considering she doesn't heal. But her ult is nice, and her passive does help against all those bruisers. Senna gets enough souls between rounds and enough time to farm souls off her enemies to get to a relatively scary level by the end of the game. Still falls short of that 2 to 3 shot potential since everyone else is scaling with her, but she becomes pretty annoying to deal with by the end. Seraphine does deal a decent amount of damage, but she kind of falls into that Rakan weakness where she doesn't do enough to outright end the fight. So she kind of has to hope she and her teammate can create enough chaos and confusion for her to reset, get plants, and do it again. If she ever reaches overtime with someone that wants to be there, then, tough luck, kid. But she does have some tools to make sure it doesn't get to that point in the first place. Set builds a lot of health, and Seth does 1202 damage to both people that are fighting him. Unfortunately, this almost never matters since everyone and their mother has 5,000 health, and he does absolutely nothing after. Augments don't help in the slightest, he just sucks. Shaco. We've talked about the big three quite a bit. Say hello to number 2. Shaco has the most active method of getting to overtime entirely on his own, constantly baiting and switching enemies by planting boxes and using his ult to chase him around the map. Nobody's actually going to be fooled by it, small arena, they see you do it. But there's nowhere to back up to, and the maps are small enough that the clone never teleports back to Shaco, so who cares? Just have it chase them until the time runs out, or they get annoyed enough to just kill it and tank the damage. And that's when you can pester him just a little bit more. Most champions just straight up can't stop him from getting to overtime, where he's far more annoying, but this time with a global timer in a Fortnite zone that's closing in. I would argue that he's the worst of the big three, but he's part of the big three for a reason. Shen can taunt, and he can block auto attacks, and he can give his teammate one shield while rendering himself an easy target. That's nothing. Shyvana. Shyvana is another of the few that can utilize almost any and every augment, just to a slightly lesser effect than someone like Jax or Katarina, since her gap close isn't nearly as consistent. But she does do well against Heimerdinger, Shaco, and Kog'Maw with her AP build, and against everyone else with her bruiser or full damage builds. Her versatility is her strength, and her long-range burn keeps her well ahead of the pack. Unfortunately, you have to choose one. Singed, another great staller, but his only real, and unfortunately major downside, is that he's melee, and he has to get into melee range in order to do anything. Theoretically, you can play Singed exactly like Shaco, running around and never even starting a fight to begin with, but then they're just gonna go for your teammate and leave you to try to kill two people all by yourself in overtime. Singed just can't offer that constant and looming threat that the big three can. He's still good, don't get me wrong, just not at the god level. Sion. A big fat tank, but unlike almost every other tank, has no actual way of guaranteeing even one layer of CC. Good luck trying to land a charged Q against all these dashes and CC bots. Good luck hitting your ult with all these walls and dashes and CC bots. He does nothing and offers nothing, and ever since they removed the ability to win in your passive, he might as well be useless. Sivir. I honestly thought that she would be garbage, but her ult is actually a really good way to keep her and her teammate on the run, constantly poking and prodding just outside of danger range until the enemy is low. Her own damage isn't that great, ADC bad, but she can stick to targets long enough to ensure that low damage doesn't matter, unless they have dashes. Skarner has pillars, he's hard to run away from, and unlike Mao's ult, CCing him doesn't stop his ult lockdown, so one person is stuck directly in front of him for 2 seconds. Alongside that, he has constant damage and constant stuns, and is very hard to kill. A decent thorn in quite a few champions' sides. Sona. Interestingly garbage. It feels like she has everything she needs to succeed, with some damage, a heal, and a shield on an okay cooldown, an easy to hit AoE ult, and movement speed for some kiting. Her problem is that all of that is just hollow. She doesn't heal as much or as commonly as someone like Milio, her shields are nowhere as good as anyone that has shields, and her damage doesn't actually exist. She offers nothing even when you don't compare her to other enchanters. Soraka. If you want to keep one person alive with nothing but healing, then there you go. With someone like Olaf, she can really shine. However, she doesn't offer anything else. No way of getting your teammate in, no way of getting yourself out, no way of locking them down to make sure they can't kite. And this is a lot of slack for your partner who has to do all of that to pick up. She's still incredibly hard to kill with her wide array of augments, but hard to kill doesn't mean much if you can get run down or you can get kited out. Swain.
Yeah, so the Swain thing, if anybody doesn't know, they changed Swain's ultimate a long time ago, but a lot of people still don't know this, to where as long as he's hitting champions, like as long as there are champions in his range, he can keep it going forever. So it's very hard to actually disengage from his ultimate in this game mode for most comps. So he can just kind of ult and be immortal and also deal a lot of damage for the entire round and force you to like fight with him. He goes Rylai, so you're never going away from him, and it's so obnoxious. It's so OP. I hate it. I hate it so much. But also as someone who likes playing Swain, it's, not the worst thing in the world.
Silas. He can heal pretty consistently, but his damage is incredibly lackluster. On top of that, his trump card of stealing the enemy's ults doesn't actually feel that good here, since most of the good champions have ults that don't really help you or affect them, and most of the bad champions lose to you anyway. So, you know, he's alright. Syndra. To be honest, I don't really get what the hype around her actually is. Against the squishier champions, she is one of the scariest champions and one of the few champions that can just one-shot you on her own. And she does have her own get out of jail free card to keep herself safe for some period of time. But her game plan is ruined when people don't get one bursted and can then promptly close the gap, in which she then only has her E, and even then this can be avoided if both of you just come at her from more than a 60-degree angle. She's still very strong because of how impossible she is to deal with for a lot of champions, cough cough ADCs, but against the high tiers she kinda doesn't have a place. Tahm Kench. Big tank, has some CC, only dies if he's getting super focused. Sejuani, but ever so slightly better because of his ult. Taliyah does a lot of damage and has a direct counter to dashes. She can then throw them back and repeat the process until death. Better than Syndra, since she only trades a little bit of range for survivability, and range doesn't really matter unless you're dealing with the greatest of all time. Talon. Despite us winning our Talon game, I've been informed to put Talon in F tier.
Throw him an F, please. I don't want anyone to think that you can play Talon in this game mode and get away with it to any degree.
He is a textbook assassin, but unlike the other assassins, he firmly relies on the distance being closed before he starts his combo to do damage, and that damage could only kill ADCs anyway. As we've discussed, ADCs aren't that good, and ADCs in the game mode still dumpster Talon, since there's no jungle to hide in. If you didn't expect Taric to be this high, then I don't know, you haven't really been watching this video. Constant heals, constant stuns, and an ult that makes both him and his one teammate invulnerable. It's ridiculously strong in any fight with any teammate ever. Not much else needs to be said, but please don't play Taric, I beg of you, please. Teemo, the last of the big three, and arguably the most annoying.
Oh wait, the team up, the shroom placement was actually so good. And the blind!
Oh.
This is fun, huh? This is so fun!
All of the big three want to fight for the center of the arena, but where Haim works his way in immediately, or he has to piece by piece fight his way in, and Shaco runs around the outskirts until he finds the one opening to put a box there and start harassing, Teemo sits where he spawns and starts placing shrooms, and then bouncing shrooms on those shrooms, and then bouncing shrooms on those shrooms, over and over and over until those shrooms reach the center. And by that point, most champions already lost. You either aggressively run at him before he does the inevitable, or you become so tanky that you can walk through his minefield and deal enough damage to him before he runs away and repeats the process on the other side of the map. There aren't a lot of champions that can do that, and that number gets even lower when you remember that he is a blind that stops auto attacks. ADC's bad. Now that the 5 have all been discussed, I'd like to say that these 5 are largely interchangeable. They all invalidate a large majority of the champion pool, and they typically just counter each other. Who counters what and who gets countered by what just varies depending on who you're playing and what your teammate is doing. Thresh. Ugh, I bit my tongue. Thresh is surprisingly tanky, which is his biggest downside in Summoner's Rift. He would go in, lock down one person, and die with all the heat getting put on him. But here, with all the tanky augments and the freedom to not be on a support salary, he now gets to make use of his insanely short cooldowns. He doesn't quite stack up to the likes of like Allistar, but he has amazing peel, amazing lockdown, constantly pushes people around in overtime, and has some freedom to build more bruisery items to supplement some damage. Surprisingly, very strong. Tristana. Without the attack speed cap, and her Q giving her buttloads of attack speed, she can actually change her build around to use things like Rage Blade, Gunblade, and Nashor's Tooth, and just auto attack rather than trying to burst with E. Don't get me wrong, press E before starting anything. But now she can do more damage with just straight auto attacking. She actually rivals Kai'Sa in damage and only falls short because she can't quite build full AP and her jump isn't instant, leaving her a little vulnerable to CC barrage. In a world where everyone looks at this list and goes nothing but top tiers, Trundle becomes so much better. He steals a percentage of health, armor, and magic resist, and in this tanky, bruisery 6000 HP meta, stealing 40% of everything is absolutely ridiculous and would destroy the game plans of most of the top tiers. Obviously, we don't live in such a competitive world. Thank God, people are still gonna pick what they want to play. And he does suffer against 4 of the big 5, since health and resistances aren't exactly how they win in the first place. But he still holds the position of the hard counter against super tanks. Tryndamere. Yeah, he doesn't do damage. He can't actually gap close against frontline backlines. He can't kill bruisers without going full damage himself, and that only opens him up to dying faster. And he has no answer against the big 5, other than looking intimidating. Insanely underwhelming. Twisted Fate. Does no damage, literally just a yellow card bot. Never use him. Twitch. He does have the advantage over Trist in that he can go full AP if he needs to, but he just doesn't do as much damage as she does. Once again, I don't really get what the hype around him is. He can start the fight with his ult and use plants to get it back up by the end, but that extra range doesn't mean much if they can wait him out or just run him down. Udyr. When I used him, I went the AP Bruiser build, and it was trash. I went against a lethality Udyr, and he killed everything he got his hands on. Closing that distance against the big 3 is a big problem, but with all the people that want to be next to him or just in the danger zone, he can explode movement speed wise with his E and obliterate them. Urgot. He's a bruiser. I mean, having an execute is nice, but doesn't quite have the survivability that other bruisers have, having him rely on his teammate a little more to close out kills without fully committing or dying. Varus. He has to go the Rageblade build to deal good damage, because let's be honest, lethality isn't going to do anything, so he goes for the Rageblade build but has to stand pretty close to get anything done. And pretty close is not where you want to be against these big buff boys. He does have his get out of jail free card in his ult, but unlike Syndra Z, it's on an ultimate level cooldown. Vayne. Percent max health true damage with no attack speed cap. Come on. She's only an A+ because her range is abysmal, and she has to fight pretty hard to make sure she doesn't die before she gets her, regulated 20 auto attacks off. Veigar. For every ability he hits, Veigar gets 1 AP. In an arena where people are constantly fighting, you can imagine that he's hitting people quite a lot. Now imagine getting 13 free AP every single round on top of all of that AP you're getting for free anyway. That's Veigar. By round 9, I have 329 free AP. That's 4 entire items worth of AP by just playing the champion. He's in the unique position where he can build 2 AP items, go full tank, and still be just as strong as he would be in a normal game. Don't get me wrong, he needs to have this in order to get through these big health bars. But he's one of the few mages that can actually get through these big health bars. He can kill people while being just as tanky as they are. That's crazy. Vel'Koz. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't get 300 free AP. He can get 1 or 2 combos off, but he can't really stop people from walking towards him, and he really requires a lot of space to play properly. Space that he doesn't have and cannot create. Trash. Vex. She also doesn't get 300 AP. She's also a mage that can't kill. But instead of not having anything to keep the distance, she ignores that entirely and puts herself right next to her enemies. Vi. Closing the distance quickly is always good, but similarly to Jarvan, she can't actually go the lethality build that she really likes to kill people. So she's forced to go Bruiser, which really hurts because she doesn't do much after her full combo anyway. Soft counters the big 3 since you can't get away from her ult once she starts it, but her partner really has to bring the thunder down in order to make sure they stay dead. Viego almost never gets his ult off in a meaningful way, but he doesn't really need to, with how tanky he can get and how often his stun and his Q come up. He absolutely loves extended fights, and his E can cover basically the entire map of some arenas, actually getting him close to the attack speed cap. Makes great use of a bunch of augments and loves to fight all the people in the tier around him. In the Viktor Veigar comp, having two walls that people simply can't cross is a deadly combo. Viktor benefits much more from the combo than Veigar does, and he doesn't offer that same amount of damage or tankiness, but does offer much better kiting in case he's getting rushed down. Still, worth his weight in gold. Vladimir doesn't quite enjoy fighting all these tanky top tiers, but he can still hold his own. He can keep himself alive for a long time if he isn't getting focused down, and if he just had a little more damage or can synergize with augments a little more, he would be an A tier. Volibear. Big Bear, has stun, can heal a lot, you know where we're going with this. Only mid A+ because of his striking inability to catch the likes of the big three or deal with Swain and Kog'Maw. Warwick. Having flat damage reduction is huge, and having insane attack speed that only gets better as their health gets lower, while also having more healing as his health gets lower, is an insane combo that kills champions outright or lets him fight for an infinite amount of time. He has to commit a lot to shut down the big three, but with his ult he can start the fight, and that's important. Wukong is there to get in and mess up your day. More of an enabler than a primary damage threat. He works extremely well with another bruiser that can go in with him, and from there he can keep the target knocked up and surrounded for as long as he's alive. Augments don't actually pair too well with him besides the ability haste ones, but it doesn't really matter since what he wants to do is clear and cutthroat from the start. Xayah does a lot of damage, and can often be the solo carry in a frontline backline comp. Her augment synergy is huge, and her damage is huge, and she can keep herself alive for a decent amount of time. Xerath. An artillery mage that can't kill you outright. Somehow worse than Vel'Koz, because at least Vel'Koz doesn't slow himself down, and he does do some true damage. Xin Zhao. He's okay. He can knock people up and hit them with auto attacks, and his ult is sorta good for overtime if he ever gets there. Nothing special, kinda sucks actually. Yasuo and Yone. I'll just pair them together since they do basically the same thing. They stack Q and then they look for the big ult. Both do decent damage, but both feel much squishier and synergize with augments a lot less than you would think. Yone is slightly better than Yasuo since he can ult whenever and wherever, but it's more of the same, really. Yorick now gets zombies every 8 seconds. With this, he can swarm you multiple times over before the circle closes, and he really only needs it to go right one time to just kill you. Similar to Annie, but placing the damage in his shovel rather than in the minion itself. But they work scarily well together to make a 2v2 feel like a 5v2. It's Yuumi. She does very little, but the very little she does is done while she's literally unhittable. With super tanks, it's just a much worse Ivern that you can't actually kill. But, you know, Ivern himself often gets to that point anyway. But let's be honest, I hate just looking at her. And even if she didn't have synergy with anything and did absolutely nothing and was F tier, I'd still probably ban her. She's a furry piece of shit. Zac. Big tank, heals a lot, but lacks the resistances and the short cooldown CC that someone like Maokai has, and his healing can be directly stopped by just stepping on his blobs, making him a far easier target to kill if you focus him down than the likes of like Mundo, which has his ult quick and guaranteed. But, you know, as we say here, healing is king, and having decent damage with Demonic Embrace means it never feels bad to have him on your team with anyone. Zed. Assassin that can't kill and does absolutely nothing with his bruiser build. Can't even kill ADCs without pretty much perfect augments. Since the arena is small, Zeri has no problem staying in her ult for the full double duration. and provided she sacrifices some augments or items to be tankier, can make my words are so hard. She can make great use of the infinite attack speed scaling and have her Q on an effective 0-second cooldown. Even despite her getting gutted, the circumstances surrounding 2v2 still allow her to be strong with the right partner and a little bit of augment luck. Ziggs, artillery mage and the worst of them. You know where he goes. Zilean. I despise Zilean in normal games because killing a person twice is the stupidest thing. Now imagine him getting any movement speed augment or any ability haste augment that affects the cooldown of both his ult and his ability to lower his own cooldowns. And you have a guy that can't really protect his teammate, but he doesn't need to. He can revive him at full health 3 or 4 times per round. This is stupid, and I hate him and everything he stands for. As with Nidalee, her poke turned out to mean much more than I thought. She can 150 even the tankiest of bruisers with her built-in magic pin, and has the slight advantage of hitting them from even farther ranges than others. Once again, her big issue is that she can't do anything to keep that distance without the help of her partner or stealing a flash. But with all of her range, she gets quite a bit of time to think about solutions. Zyra, Plants vs Zombies 3. Zyra also creates minions, but unlike the big 3, her minions are on a timer. But with ability haste being as plentiful as it is, and ability haste affecting both her passive and her W, Zyra can supply a constant barrage of plants, all slowing and burning and dealing an insane amount of magic damage. And she can overcharge all of those plants with her ults. And guess what? 7 super plants slapping you with no way of killing them in a reasonable amount of time forces people to run or die. She is actually crazy, and one of the biggest sleeper picks of the entire roster. Whew. And that is every champion ranked in 2v2. Once again, if you want the full discussion between me and my training partner, us making the tier list will be on the second channel. They won't be the exact same tier list, as some of my opinions changed as we continued to play throughout the week. And let me tell you, I'm not mad, but I'm certainly disappointed in you all. You people suck. After one full week, I'm already seeing 3 Kai'Sa teams? Despicable. Oh, but Maceo, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? First of all, what do you mean by that? Second of all, yeah, I did just spend over an hour telling you what the best characters are, but I just like talking about things. I play whoever I find fun, and if everyone played who they found fun, then everyone would be a little bit happier playing this game mode. Just my opinion, maybe it's just me, bro. It's 2 a.m. I've been talking for a while. Yeah, I'm pretty delirious. If you want to win, this is the list. I feel like Oppenheimer after all these games and telling the world about Kog'Maw Milio and Victor Viger.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
But if you stayed this long, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment telling me why your favorite champion should be in S tier, and I'll see you all in the arena.